It started out like any other quiet afternoon in our neighborhood, but what happened next is something I never imagined I'd be telling you today. Picture this. My wife was walking back from the mailbox when a man she had never seen before pulled up in a car covered in fake HOA security decals. He stepped out dressed like some kind of wannabe cop, badge clipped his shirt, and tried to throw his weight around as if he had real authority. At first, it just seemed like another one of those HOA power trips you hear about, but within seconds, things took a very dark turn. This man wasn't just pretending to be an officer. He was aggressive, loud, and tried to intimidate my wife into following his made-up rules. He kept demanding to know why she was trespassing on our own property. My wife, calm as always, asked him for real identification, and that's when he suddenly reached for something he never should have. In that moment, the air turned heavy, and the whole situation felt like it could spiral out of control in seconds. Here's the twist he never saw coming. What this fake HOA cop didn't know was who he was actually dealing with. My wife isn't just anyone. She's Delta Force, still active, still sharp, and trained for moments exactly like this. But instead of panicking, she kept her composure, analyzing every move, waiting for the right moment. The so-called security officer thought he had all the power, but he was about to learn a lesson he wouldn't forget. What happened in the next few moments completely flipped the situation on its head, and let's just say, this man picked the wrong house, and definitely the wrong woman to mess with. To understand how things escalated that day, you need to know a little more about what had been happening in our neighborhood. For weeks, we had been hearing strange stories about this so-called HOA stepping way out of line. People were getting random warnings stuck to their doors, fines for things that didn't even make sense, and threats about towing cars that weren't violating anything. Most neighbors just tried to ignore it, thinking it was just HOA being pushy, but my wife and I started noticing something off. None of these notices matched official HOA paperwork, and the rules being enforced weren't in any of the documents we'd signed when we bought the house. Something didn't add up. That's when we realized there was a group of people pretending to run the neighborhood, like their own little kingdom. They weren't on the Real HOA board at all, but they acted like they had full control. Some folks even said they saw security officers patrolling late at night, flashing lights on cars, and trying to intimidate homeowners. It was clear we weren't dealing with a normal dispute anymore. This was organized and deliberate. Now, here's the part the fake cop had no clue about. My wife has years of experience spotting scams and threats long before they happen. While most people might have been scared or frozen in that moment, she was calm because she had already pieced together what was really going on. She knew this wasn't just a random encounter. It was connected to something bigger. As the man stood there puffing his chest, trying to act in control, she was already reading him like an open book. Every movement, every word, every glance told her something. And the more she studied him, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about HOA drama anymore. Something far deeper was at play. The longer the man stood there in front of my wife, the more his act started to crack. His fake uniform looked convincing at first glance, but up close the details didn't match. Cheap patches, no official insignia, and the badge clipped to his belt looked like something ordered online. Yet, what made the moment dangerous wasn't just the disguise, it was the confidence he carried, like he'd done this before and gotten away with it. That's what worried me the most. If this guy was bold enough to walk around with fake authority in broad daylight, how many other families had already been pressured into following his so-called rules? Behind this standoff was a much bigger problem brewing in our community. Some neighbors whispered about secret meetings being held in a garage at the far end of the street. Others claimed they were forced to pay cash fines directly to men who looked like this one, or risk having their cars damaged overnight. It wasn't just intimidation, it was a scheme carefully designed to scare people into silence. My wife and I had suspected something like this, but now it was standing right in front of us, demanding to be taken seriously. Meanwhile, another angle of the conflict came from the Real HOA board. They insisted they had no involvement and told homeowners to simply ignore the imposters. But ignoring them was impossible when people were being followed, harassed, and in our case, directly confronted on our own property. That gap between what the official HOA was saying and what we were experiencing created a wave of confusion and fear in the neighborhood. And here's the truth. While this man thought he was in control of the moment, my wife was already playing 3 steps ahead. She knew the danger wasn't just him, but the entire operation behind him, and that meant the real fight was only beginning. The air grew heavier with each passing second as the man tried to hold his ground. His voice got louder, his threats more reckless, and he kept insisting that my wife was violating HOA security codes that didn't even exist. Neighbors had started to peek through curtains, sensing that something serious was unfolding, but no one dared to step outside. It felt like the entire street was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. My wife, calm as ever, stood her ground, her eyes locked on him, analyzing every twitch, every shift in his stance. She knew something was coming. The tension rose when the man's hand hovered near his belt, like he was about to make a move. My wife could see the nervous energy pulsing through him. He wasn't a trained officer. He was someone playing dress-up with power he didn't actually have. But that unpredictability made him even more dangerous. It wasn't about whether he had the authority. It was about whether he'd do something reckless. And with every second that passed, that possibility felt more real. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the bigger picture. This wasn't just one man. It was proof that the fake HOA operation had escalated far beyond intimidation. If they were now sending imposters to confront homeowners face-to-face, armed with props and a dangerous attitude, how far were they willing to go? And how many people in the neighborhood were already too afraid to speak up? My wife wasn't just standing against him. She was standing against all of it. Every second stretched longer than the last, as if the world had slowed down. The street was silent, the tension unbearable. And then, in one sudden moment, everything shifted. What happened next would push the entire conflict to the breaking point. Just when it seemed like the standoff had reached its peak, another car rolled slowly down the street. It didn't look like a police cruiser, but it had the same cheap security decals slapped on the side as the first man's vehicle. My stomach dropped as 2 more men stepped out, both dressed in mismatched uniforms with shiny badges that looked just as fake. They walked toward my wife like they were backing up their buddy, and suddenly the quiet street felt like the center of something far bigger than we realized. This wasn't just one fake HOA cop trying to scare us. It was coordinated. These men were organized, and they clearly weren't afraid to escalate. The neighbors hiding behind their windows weren't just witnessing a confrontation anymore. They were watching a small army move in, one that had been hiding in plain sight under the cover of phony authority. My wife never flinched. Instead, she shifted her stance ever so slightly, her calmness sending a message I knew the men didn't understand. To them, she looked like just another homeowner being cornered. But in reality, she was assessing the entire situation, distance, angles, numbers. Her training had kicked in completely, and while they thought they were closing in, she was already calculating how to turn the tables. The fake officers started circling, their tone sharper now, throwing around phrases like neighborhood regulations and security enforcement. But beneath their words was something unmistakable: fear. They expected her to fold, to be intimidated, to hand over control like everyone else had. Instead, they found someone who didn't even blink. And then, in that tense moment, one of the men reached for a radio on his belt and spoke into it. That's when we realized there were more of them nearby, waiting. The trap was much bigger than we thought. The radio crackled, and for a split second the street was swallowed in silence. Then a voice on the other end ordered the men to bring her in. That was the breaking point. The fake HOA cops thought they had control, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. My wife's calm broke into action, so fast it stunned everyone watching. In one fluid motion, she stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding, the kind of tone that made seasoned soldiers freeze. The men hesitated, their confidence draining as they realized this wasn't going according to plan. Neighbors who had been hiding now stepped outside, phones in hand, recording everything. The so-called officers shifted uncomfortably, their power fading with every second of exposure. My wife kept them talking, controlling the situation, all while signaling me subtly to call for backup. Within minutes, real law enforcement arrived, and that's when the entire scheme unraveled. The imposters were cornered, their fake uniforms exposed, their cars searched. What had seemed like intimidation turned into undeniable evidence of a long-running scam against the entire neighborhood. But the biggest twist came when the truth surfaced. These men weren't random thugs playing dress-up. They were connected to a former HOA board member who had been kicked out years earlier. Bitter, broke, and desperate for control, he had built his own shadow HOA, complete with fake security and bogus fines, targeting families who wouldn't fight back. The neighborhood finally breathed again as the imposters were taken away, but the story didn't end there. Just when we thought it was over, my wife leaned in and told me quietly that she recognized one of the voices on the radio. It wasn't just a scam. Someone higher up, someone with real influence, was still pulling the strings, and this battle was only the beginning. After that night, the neighborhood was never quite the same. With the imposters exposed and their ringleader revealed, the real HOA finally stepped in and admitted they had ignored the warning signs for far too long. Official security measures were put in place, and residents started working together instead of staying silent. For the first time in weeks, people felt safe walking their streets, parking their cars, and opening their front doors without second-guessing who might be watching. The fear that had gripped our community was finally beginning to lift. For my wife and me, it was more than just relief. It was a reminder of how quickly things can spiral when no one stands up to intimidation. She never saw herself as a hero, but the truth is, her courage stopped a situation that could have gone much worse. The neighbors who once hid behind their curtains now came forward to thank her, sharing stories of the pressure and threats they had faced. By speaking out, everyone realized they weren't alone, and together, they took back the neighborhood from the shadows that had been trying to control it. The biggest lesson we learned was that power thrives in silence. Those fake HOA enforcers had relied on fear, on people feeling isolated and unsure. But once the truth came out, their entire operation crumbled. It showed us that even the most convincing mask of authority can't stand against real courage and unity. And yet, there was still that one mystery lingering. The voice on the radio, the one my wife recognized but couldn't place immediately. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was the thread that would lead to something even bigger. For now, though, the neighborhood could breathe again, and the battle we faced had left us stronger than before.